Welcome to this course Development Economics 2, and today's topic is Demographic Transition Part 1. So what we learn in this lecture? First we discuss a quick recap what we have done so far. We did the ideas of development and underdevelopment, the definitional issues regarding development, features of underdevelopment, etc. We also talked about then basic definitions and concepts of demography, right? And then we talked about simple definition of dependency ratio, and after that we went to discuss the idea of complex and advanced measures of dependency ratio. Then we also talked about various country experiences, countries of like Japan, China, India, and some of the countries of Africa, Nigeria. We have discussed about these country experiences regarding dependency ratio, regarding fertility rates, etc. All right. Okay. So now we are going to discuss we are going to define the idea of demographic transition. What is demographic transition? Demographic transition actually refers to the process by which fertility rates eventually decline to replacement levels. That is the process of demographic transition. So now I offer a formal definition for demographic transition. The phasing out process of population growth rates from a virtually stagnant growth stage characterized by high birth rates and high death rates through a rapid growth stage with high birth rates and low death rates to a stable low growth stage in which both birth and death rates are low. What does this definition entail us? Initially there was a stage with very high birth rate and death rate, so population growth rate was minimal. Then with the advent of modernization in our history, first of all death rate started to decline, but birth rate did not. Birth rate remained quite high. And then in advanced stages of modernization, birth rate also started to decline, and eventually fertility rate comes down to the replacement level or so, and that resulted with very low growth of population in the next stage, right? So there are three stages. Now before going to those stages, let us take the first question here. How did demographic transition happen in developed countries? So now to answer the first question about demographic transition, let us consider the issue of demographic transition for developed countries. And for developed countries, we are considering the scenario of Western Europe. So you see in this diagram, in the x-axis we are considering the timeline, and in the y-axis we have considered birth rates and death rates, right? So have a closer look at this diagram, and we are going to continue the explanatory portion. So there are three stages in this diagram. According to this diagram, there are three stages of demographic transition. Now first of all let us take the stage 1. Stage 1 is about a stage which is referred to before pre-modernization stage, right? Pre-modern era. So as per the year wise mark, we can say that 1780 to 1840 in Western Europe can be considered as the stage 1, in which most importantly in the stage 1 birth rate and death rate both remained very high. As a result, population growth rate remained very low. Next, in the stage 2 in Western Europe, year wise we can say that around 1850 to 1900 or so is the stage 2 for the Western European countries. So what is the crucial point about stage 2? Most crucial point about stage 2 is that, first of all, due to modernization, the death rate started to decline significantly. although birth rate remained very high. As a result, this stage, the stage 2, is the stage for very high population growth. Next, so while explaining the stage 2, we must say that death rate started to decline because of modernization, because of the modern technology and improvement in public health system, education, etc. So, and in the stage 2 we can observe there is a divergence between birth rate and death rate, as birth rate remained very high and death rate started to decline significantly. Due to this divergence, population growth rate also picked up in this stage. Now, we are going to talk about the stage 3 for the Western European countries. So, stage 3 year-wise we can mark that around 1900 to 2000. So, after 1900 and maybe till now, we may consider it as stage 3. So, what is the discerning issue about stage 3? That is, in the stage 3, in the advanced stage of modernization, birth rate also started to decline. And eventually, birth rate becomes closer. It comes closer to the low death rate. As a result, population growth rate becomes closer to 0, very low population growth rate. So, this is the current situation of Western Europe. So, now explanation. So, 3 historical stages are there. So, before the early 19th century, birth rate remained around 35 per thousand and death rate 30 per thousand. It resulted 0.5% per year population growth rate. So, in the stage 2, we can observe that due to advancement of technologies, improvements in public health provisioning, due to all these things, death rate started declining significantly, although birth rate remained high. As a result, population growth rate picked up. And again, in the stage 3, we could observe that death rate declined significantly and birth rate also started to decline, and eventually it almost merged with the death rate. As a result, population growth rate remained around 1% level. So, by the end of the Western Europe's demographic transition in the second half of the 20th century, with birth rates fluctuating and death rates remaining fairly stable or rising slightly. So, this latter phenomenon is simply due to the older age distributions of contemporary European populations. We have so far discussed the situation of demographic transition for developed countries, taking the case of Western Europe. So, now the next question is about how did demographic transition happen in developing countries. So, now with this question regarding demographic transition in developing countries, let us consider this diagram for developing countries. Now, let us have a closer look here. The x-axis is once again the timeline, and in the y-axis we are measuring birth rate and death rate, right? So, one significant change happened here, that is the change regarding timeline. So, here the timeline is starting from 1900 onwards, all right? Okay. So, now while explaining the situation of demographic transition in developing countries, you see birth rates remained very high and death rates also remained very high, although fluctuated in the stage 1 during the period 1900 to 1950. So, birth rates in many developing countries today are considerably higher than they were in pre-industrial Western Europe. This is because women tend to marry at an earlier age. As a result, there are both more families for a given population size and more years in which to have children. So, in case of developing countries, as we can observe, from the figure that the stage 1 is 1900 to 1950, in which birth rate remained very high and growth rate fluctuated and remained on the whole very high. Since 1950 onwards, we can see the stage 2. So 1950 to 1970 or so is the stage 2 marked for the developing countries. So in the developing countries, with regard to the stage 3, we can distinguish between two broad classes of developing countries. So in case A, due to modern methods of death control combined with rapid and widely distributed rises in levels of living have resulted in death rates falling as low as 10 per thousand and birth rate also falling rapidly to the levels between 12 to 25 per thousand. So what are the countries in case A? So case A, basically in the stage 3 we can classify, we can actually point out two classes of countries, case A and case B. Case A are those countries that performed better in terms of health and other things due to technological advancement and other things. In case A, we can point out countries like Taiwan, South Korea, Costa Rica, China, Cuba, Chile, Sri Lanka. Such countries, they performed better in the case A. So their decline in the death rate is much more significant than many other countries. In case B, after an initial period of rapid decline, death rates have failed to drop further, largely because of the persistence of widespread absolute poverty and low levels of living, and more recently because of the AIDS epidemic. And the continuance of still quite high birth rates as a result of these low levels of living causes overall population growth rates to remain relatively very high. Now, important questions. What are the important questions? When and under what conditions are developing nations likely to experience falling birth rates and a slower expansion of population? Or in other words, what are the principal determinants or causes of high fertility rates in developing countries? What are the key causes or what are the principal determinants of high fertility rates in developing countries? Now, to answer such questions, we need to ponder over and we need to discuss the concept of Malthusian population trap, which we are going to take up in the next lecture. Now we are going to talk about India's demographic transition. So we have discussed the theory of demographic transition for developed countries, and we have discussed theory of demographic transition for developing countries, and now specifically let us talk briefly about demographic transition for India. What is the Indian story? Indian story also starts as usual from 1900, around 1900, 1901. So we can observe that the pattern is quite similar. Now let us go to the explanation for India. So for India, the stage 1 is 1901 to 1961. Stage 2 is referred to 1961 to 2001, and stage 3 is from 2001 onwards. All right. So now let us take another question, the next question in this lecture, that is, what is demographic dividend? Demographic dividend. So let us first try to define the concept of demographic dividend. A country benefits from a demographic dividend when the proportion of the dependent young generation falls and the share of the population of working age increases. This is now happening on a global scale. For every child younger than 15, there were 1.8 people in the year 1950. And today this figure has become around 2.5, and by the end of the century there will be 3.4. So rich and poor countries in terms of demographic dividend, rich countries have benefited from this transition in the last decades and are now facing the demographic problem of an increasingly larger share of retired people that are not contributing to the labor market. In the coming decades, it will be the poorer countries that can benefit from this demographic dividend. So the point is that rich countries have already reaped the benefit, almost already reaped the entire benefit of demographic dividend. Many rich countries have done it, right? And now they are facing a problem of too many elderly people. Proportion of elderly population has increased significantly in some of the rich countries. So that's a major issue for them. Now, so this figure is an important figure about the case of demographic dividend. So here you can observe, first of all, you take the case for Japan. You see, Japan has enjoyed demographic dividend for 40 years, started from 1964 and it ended in 2004. Similar case is visible for Italy, and Republic of Korea is still enjoying demographic dividend. Now let us consider India. India's case is very curious because India, according to this understanding, India has just entered to the phase of demographic dividend since the year 2018, and it is going to get this benefit since till the year 2055, right? So if you see the graph below, you can observe that around 2020, see the black marked portion, not the blue portion, then the black marked portion, you can observe that India is going to face the benefit of demographic dividend through higher number of people in the working age group. So in the working age group, there are more number of people in India for these years, and India will get or India may get that benefit of having too many people in the working age group, right? So as the proportion of people in the working age group increased in India, so as a result, it may, if it can take proper policies, it may reap the benefit of demographic dividend, right? So factors contributing the demographic dividend. What are the factors contribute to the demographic dividend? Factor number 1, lower fertility rate. There are empirical evidences that fertility decline has led to demographic change accompanied by greater female participation in the labor force. As fertility rates decline, female labor force participation should increase. So next, increase in the working age population and fall in the dependency ratio, and next, growth in the labor productivity. The research has proved that fruits of demographic dividend are channeled through the increase in labor productivity. So these are the possibilities for India. Now what are the challenges India facing? First, India has amongst the lowest women's labor force participation rates, and it is not only very low, and it is declining also since 2004-05. Second, despite remarkable economic growth during the past 3 decades, the majority of Indian workers are engaged in informal employment sector. And third, although services sector generated significant growth, yet services sector has not generated significant number of employment in India. Fourth, lack of human capital and scarcity of skilled workers. So scarcity of education and training, that's a problem for India. So just the number, having the number doesn't mean anything until unless we can produce skilled workforce. Finally, the urgency to put in place appropriate policies is magnified by the reality that what follows the demographic dividend is a time when aging population begins to increase again, because of increasing longevity and decreasing fertility. So after having the demographic dividend, the aging population, number of elderly people also increases. So guiding proper policies, having proper policies to manage these elderly people is also very important. Now let us end with the possibility of demographic disaster. If in case a country cannot reap the benefit coming out from demographic dividend, right, then it could lead to a demographic disaster. How? What are the meaning of demographic disaster? What can happen? Number one, poverty, unemployment and low level of human development. We can observe that if we cannot give these people, these young people, gainful employment, then it will result in poverty, unemployment and lower level of human development. Next, adverse land-man ratio and high level of land fragmentation may happen. Next, environmental and ecological consequences may result in deforestation, excessive pressure on natural resources may also happen. Urbanization in a completely unplanned, uncontrolled manner through uncontrolled migration can happen, which may further create problem and further worsen the problem of environment and other things. Also, food security, although we have achieved as a country, we have achieved self-sufficiency in food production, yet regionally and time to time and crop wise or food item wise scarcity or food insecurity may get developed. So food security may become a problem. So what are the take home points in this lecture? So the first key idea we have discussed is the idea of demographic transition. Then we discussed this idea of demographic transition for developed countries and developing countries. And then we have also discussed an important point in today's context, that is the possibility and probability of demographic dividend or demographic disaster. Thank you.